Kia ora koutou, ko Kelly aho. I'm Kelly Dorgan and I work at the Canterbury Breastfeeding Advocacy Service, which is a service at Te Pua Waitanga Kyoto Tahi Trust that's all about protecting, promoting and supporting breastfeeding. And I usually do the breastfeeding sessions in Whānau Mai, so we're obviously not able to do those wānanga at the moment because we're in the COVID-19 lockdown. And so Sarah has asked me to put together this little video to support some of the information that we're sending out about breastfeeding. And if you happen to be watching this and you're not doing Whānau Mai, or it's not still during the lockdown, then I'm sure that it's likely to still be relevant if you're pregnant or a breastfeeding mum or are supporting somebody who is. So what I'm wanting to talk about today is some of the magic of breastfeeding. And if you hang in long enough, then towards the end I'm going to share with you some information about a really simple thing that you can do that will not only increase your chances of having breastfeeding going well, but it will also help when breastfeeding isn't going well, and all breastfeeding mama have some of those times. And it will also be useful for labour and birth and for parenting. So hang in with me. So breastfeeding is an expression of aroha, of love, of manaakitanga, of kindness, of whanaungatanga or connection, of kotahitanga, unity, tiakitanga, protection, rangatiratanga, self-determination, of mōhiotanga, understanding, and of course of māmatanga, which is motherhood. And what we know is that prior to colonisation, all Māori babies were breastfed. And for this reason, it's also seen to be tikanga. So your pepe's ancestors had a close relationship with nature and knew intuitively that there was nothing better to be giving their babies than nature's milk. And if for any reason this wasn't able to be provided by the baby's biological mama, then someone else in the hapu would breastfeed the baby, and this was considered to be perfectly normal. And breastfeeding was fully supported in these communities where children were highly respected and valued as gifts from the gods, and also as the future of the iwi, and women were also respected and valued for their role in birthing and feeding them. And so we have some beautiful words in te reo Māori that identify how integral breastfeeding was to pre-colonial Māori life. And one of those words is wairua. So as many of you will know, this is the Māori word for spirit, or for the non-physical essence that connects us all to everything in this world and beyond, and the world beyond. And so the Māori word wai is the word for water, and the word rua is the number 2, and thus the word wairua means two waters. And this is said to refer to the tears and the mist of Ranginui, or the Sky Father, or the tears of Ranginui, the Sky Father, in the form of the rain and the mists, and to the breast milk of Papa Tuanuku, or Earth Mother, in the form of the rivers, lakes and streams. So the two waters that connect everything in this world. The second word is ukaipo. So in te reo Māori, the word u means the breast or the chest, the word kai is the word for food, and the word po is the word for night. So literally, ukaipo is feeding from the breast at night. So being all snuggled into your mama and receiving her nourishment. And in te ao Māori, ukaipo is a term that's used to refer to your original source of sustenance. So to the things that nourish and sustain us. And it's often used to refer to our original home, to our whenua, our hapu, to our marae, to our original people and land that provide nurture and nourishment through our relationships with them. So you might hear terms like no mai ki tō ukaipo or hoki mai ki tō ukaipo, which mean welcome home or return home to breastfeeding at night. Well, not really, but to being nourished or recharged by your place of origin. So breastfeeding is part of nature's system of nurture and of nourishment for mammalian infants or infants of mammals. And as such, we know that it provides a number of biological benefits, both to mothers and babies. And I'd also like to think to whānau and hapu and iwi, to our wider families and our communities. It's incredibly environmentally friendly and has the shortest food mile ever. And it helps to increase sociability in the whole group, as I'll talk about soon. So breastfeeding is known to reduce the risk of illness, allergy and infection in our babies, to reduce the risk of sudden unexplained death or SUDI. It reduces the chances of babies developing diabetes and obesity later in life. And for mama, it offers some protection against breast and ovarian cancers, cardiac disease, osteoporosis, and also diabetes and obesity. People often also talk about it being free and see that as one of the benefits of it, but that's only because our economy doesn't kind of acknowledge time spent caring for our own children at home. So it actually requires quite a significant investment from our mama in terms of her time, and I think that should be acknowledged. But yep, certainly it doesn't cost any money. So breastfeeding's all about connection and responsiveness, and the connection part is pretty self-explanatory. You need to have a baby connected for it to be breastfeeding. However, the responsive part is something that is not so well known. So we understand that we're being responsive to our baby's needs when we breastfeed them, but what's not so well known is that during breastfeeding, there's a transfer not only of milk from the mother to the baby, but also a transfer of information from the baby to the mother. So we know that when babies are unwell, the mother's body will respond by making milk with more antibodies than usual. That if it's hot or if the baby's dehydrated, the milk will have a higher water content. So there's some form of communication that happens during breastfeeding, and we think it's probably from the baby's saliva. That allows the milk to be made to perfectly match the baby's needs. The composition of the milk also alters according to other information that the mother's body already has about the time of day, for example. So milk at night is more sedating and during the day is more stimulating. So it's pretty magic. But that's only part of the magic. So breastfeeding's heavily influenced by this chemical in our bodies called oxytocin. And this is a pretty amazing chemical that's released in the brain and acts in heaps of different ways in the body in different situations. It has a really specific response as a hormone in that it's responsible for causing uterine contractions, which in effect squeeze the baby out, and during breastfeeding. So in breastfeeding, it's responsible for squeezing the milk out of the little pockets in the breast where it's made, where it's squeezed down the ducts or the tube and into the baby's mouth, and what's known as the letdown reflex. So oxytocin's at its highest level ever in the human lifespan in a woman immediately after she gives birth, as long as she gives birth vaginally. And it's got a massive role in helping her to fall in love with her baby. So yeah, it has a big role in bonding. So babies are also born with high oxytocin levels, which also helps them bond with their mothers. It makes them be alert and engaging, and it encourages them to breastfeed. And then while they're breastfeeding, while they're sucking, the actual act of sucking stimulates more oxytocin to be released. So they kind of come with lots of oxytocin, which helps them to create even more oxytocin, which makes them loving and lovable. Now, interestingly, babies who have had a stressful birth tend to have the highest oxytocin levels, and we think that this is probably a protective way to ensure that their mothers still bond with them, because if the baby's had a stressful experience during birth, then the mother probably has too, and as we'll see later, stress can have an effect on oxytocin levels, but this isn't so for newborn babies right at that time of birth. And yeah, that just ensures that the mothers will bond with them. So babies born by pre-labour caesarean, where there's a caesarean with no labour first, are born with the lowest levels of oxytocin, and their mums also have the lowest levels of oxytocin. So the mums haven't had the hit of oxytocin that comes with labour, and the babies haven't had that hit of oxytocin that can come with having a stressful birth. And this is likely to be part of the reason why these mother-baby pairs often take a bit longer and need some more support to get breastfeeding going. They definitely still can breastfeed, but it just can take a little bit longer for those hormones to kick in. So there are many amazing effects of this chemical that's released during labour and breastfeeding, but there are some other times where we see oxytocin released as well. So during any positive, loving and respectful human interactions, during pleasant touch such as massage, as a result of exercise, after a satisfying meal, and also during lovemaking, there's significant amounts of oxytocin released in those situations. Not as much as in labour or breastfeeding, but still enough for them to have an effect. So oxytocin acts as a neurotransmitter which has more general effects on our brain and nervous system. So when it's released, whether it's in labour or in some of these situations that I've just discussed, it lowers our heart rate, it lowers our breathing rate and our muscle tension, and so it makes us feel calm and relaxed. It has anti-anxiety properties, it helps us feel kind of curious and connected, and this makes us want to be more sociable and to interact with others, and also to protect those that we love. It's often called the love hormone because it's released when we make love or during any loving interaction. It also works to help us manage our pain. It stimulates the metabolism and as such has a role in weight loss. It's an anti-inflammatory. It stimulates cell growth and cell repair and thus wound healing. And all of these things, probably with the exception of exercise, are states that require relaxation. So what we know is that oxytocin has a huge part to play in the relaxation response. So this is the opposite to the stress response, where chemicals are released into the body to mobilize the body to quickly and powerfully manage a threat by either fighting it or fleeing it. And we know that the body can't be in both states at the same time. Either we're in a stress state or we're in a relaxed state. And ideally we'd spend most of our lives in a relaxed state, feeling calm and sociable and benefiting from the health-giving effects of oxytocin. And would occasionally, in response to a threat, a physical threat, move into a stress mode for a short period where our heart beats faster and our breathing shallows, and so that more oxygen can be released to our muscles. And a number of chemicals are kind of released that are not great for our ongoing health, but are really effective for helping us to get to feel defensive and aggressive and to have the power to fight or flee. Now, unfortunately for many of us, life has other stresses for which fleeing and fighting are probably not so appropriate. So things, like financial stresses or interpersonal stresses, these stresses can keep us from accessing oxytocin and the relaxation response, and actually significantly impact on our health in the long term. So if we're in a stress state for long periods of time, our bodies actually were never designed for that, then it can have significant impact on our health and increase the risks of things like heart disease and stroke. So as we've identified, stress is oxytocin's biggest threat, and that's also the case with labouring and breastfeeding. So women who feel scared or unsupported or disrespected during labour are actually more likely to need pain relief and interventions to help them birth their babies than those who are able to feel calm and respected and supported. And it's the same with breastfeeding. We know that anxiety is a big problem for our mama today, who are not always feeling honoured or respected and supported. And this can have an impact on how breastfeeding goes. The good news though is that the more oxytocin you have, the more you get. So there's a feedback system in the body that rather than stopping the release of oxytocin once it gets to a certain level, as would be the case for many other chemicals, it actually just keeps releasing more and more. So love just keeps making more love. Relaxation just keeps making you feel more relaxed. So in summary, oxytocin's required for birthing, breastfeeding and bonding, is supported by calm, relaxed, safe conditions, and the more of it there is, the more of it is made. It's released in large amounts in the mother and baby during breastfeeding, which results in greater bonding, greater milk release, greater milk production, and a greater sense of love all around. And I think that babies know this, and they come programmed to get as much of it as they can in the first few days, just by feeding, really often to get the milk to come in and make sure their mothers bond with them. They're pretty clever. Another part of the magic is that it's also contagious. So when oxytocin injections were given to a rat in a cage full of rats, the oxytocin level of all of the rats in that cage increased significantly. And they exhibited, kind of a tendency to be more sociable and more cooperative and more loving. And this, interestingly, this effect was stopped when the other rats had their noses blocked, or there was something that happened to stop them from smelling, which suggests that the rat who had the injections of oxytocin, or who had the high levels of oxytocin, let off a subtle smell that increased the oxytocin in the whole hapu, like in the whole cage full. So we think that possibly by increasing your capacity for love and relaxation, then there's a potential to increase everyone else's around you. And I think that this is what happens with babies. They seem to have this effect of bringing with them a means of increasing the amount of love in the whole whānau. And maybe that's through their oxytocin, which may impact how they smell, as no one seems to be able to get enough of a newborn smell. You know, all those grannies that just want to keep sniffing the newborn babies. Maybe they're wanting a hit of oxytocin. So what does this mean for breastfeeding and bonding with our babies in these somewhat stressful times of our COVID-19 lockdown? And what does this also mean for those who, for whatever reason, are not able to breastfeed their babies? So for many, and especially for those about to have a baby right now, the lockdown is a pretty stressful time. It means you're less likely to be spending as much time as usual with your lead maternity carer, that you have some limitations potentially on who you can have at your birth, and that you may have minimal contact with people after your baby's born. You may also have health concerns or financial stresses or other family stresses. So what can you and your whānau do to prepare for this and to maximise your chances of having positive birthing experiences and breastfeeding experiences? Well, interestingly, we've actually seen some interesting outcomes from the lockdown that we may all be able to learn from. We've got some local midwives who are reporting that breastfeeding babies seem to be putting on more weight than would be usual at this time. So there's likely to be some research done on this once it's all over, but the theorising, the thinking that's going on about this is that it could be due to mums returning home to their safe, warm, familiar environments sooner than they usually would, which minimises the number of unfamiliar people and noises and smells that may set off their stress responses that can happen in the hospital. It's a pretty unfamiliar place for most people. And it's also possible that because we're in lockdown, mums are able to just focus on being with their babies, as they're expected not to be going to the malls or the playgrounds or out for coffee in the weeks after they've birthed. So sticking to our bubbles might be something that we'll continue to be recommending for families with new babies, even after the lahui. So there's some good news. So potentially going home as soon as possible after birth, or even staying at home to birth, creating warm, safe, loving, respectful environments during labour and breastfeeding, encouraging loving interactions and gentle, pleasant touch will all support your oxytocin, helping you in your labouring and breastfeeding journeys. And the other thing that families and mamas can do during this time is to learn ways to quickly flick the body into the oxytocin or into the relaxation response or the love response. And this is actually a life skill that will not only serve you at this time, but any time you face stresses in your life that you can't actually do anything about. There are lots of different ways that you can do this, and you might even have some already. So think of whether you have a certain smell or a song or maybe a pillow or blanket or a favourite karakia or colour that always, when you experience it, makes you feel really relaxed. And if you do, think about how you could use this during labour or breastfeeding. So these things are things that have become a trigger to your brain to relax the body and to release oxytocin. And if you've got them already, then I would definitely suggest you use those. But if you haven't got anything like that already, or if you've got something but it's not appropriate to be using during labour or breastfeeding, then it actually only takes a couple of weeks to develop that association in the brain. So simply, it is about training the brain to react to a certain trigger in a certain way. So you get to choose what that trigger is, whether it be a word or a sentence or an affirmation, a colour, a different visual trigger, a song, a prayer, or even something that you like to touch, like toddlers with their blankets or their teddy bears. What's important is that you choose the trigger and you stick with it. And you create a calm, safe, warm, familiar environment, and you take a few deep breaths, focus on relaxing, and once you're relaxed and in a really calm state, then you focus on that trigger for just 5 or 10 minutes to help your brain associate that trigger with calmness or with the relaxing oxytocin response. So you do this every day for 2 weeks, and you'll find that after 2 weeks, as soon as you think of that trigger, your body will automatically go into that state of calm that you have taught it to. And after it's set up, after that reaction is set up, then you'll be able to use that trigger to access calm even when your body is in a state of stress. So once you've programmed it for that 2 weeks, do it just for a minute or two every day, just to remind your body of that connection between the trigger and the response. And then when you go into labour, you can use it on your own, or you can get a support person to remind you of it whenever you seem to be getting a bit distressed, or whenever you're not benefiting from the pain management activity or action of oxytocin. Or you can have some visual cues or use birth affirmations. And then same when you're breastfeeding, you can bring up the trigger to help you feel calmer, which will help you release oxytocin, which will help your body release more milk, which will help your baby respond well to breastfeeding. And also if you've got your stuff from Sarah for Whānau Mai, if you've got your folder, you'll have a flash drive in it with some audios on it. And some of these audios are hypnobirthing audios that you can definitely use for this. Just make sure you choose one and listen to the same one every day, and then take it with you when you go into labour, and have it with you when you're breastfeeding, or at any time when things get a little bit stressful. And remember, these are also great skills for you to use if things don't work out the way that you hoped. If your birth and breastfeeding aren't able to maximise the release and impact of oxytocin, like if you've had to be induced or have a caesarean, or if you have issues with latching, for example, then being stressed about that is only going to block the release of oxytocin and all of its wonderful effects. So in these situations, it becomes even more important to have skills to help us manage our stresses. So remember your calming trigger and use it often, especially when you notice yourself feeling unsure. Remember that calm, warm, relaxed and familiar spaces, positive interpersonal interactions and gentle, pleasant touch will support the release of oxytocin. So this means things like gazing into your baby's eyes, massaging them, holding them, having skin to skin with them becomes even more important when things get stressful or don't go according to plan. Even if they don't feel that natural, because if you haven't got that oxytocin already, then they're less likely to feel that natural. But if you make yourself do it initially, then it will just start building that oxytocin to the point where it will feel really natural. Also remember about limiting your visitors and making sure that you only have visitors who are really helpful and calm and supportive. If you're bottle feeding, whether that be formula or express breast milk, feeding baby in a way that is just like breastfeeding will help support oxytocin as well. So stripping them down, getting them skin to skin, holding them like you would a breastfed baby, just tickling the top of their lip with the teat and waiting for them to really open their mouth and show you that they're ready for food. Looking for signs that they've had enough and responding to those. All of these things will really help release oxytocin as well. Anything you do that's really responsive to your baby, when we can't rely on breastfeeding to do it, will be helpful. And if nothing else is working, remember wai o kai. So warm water has a calming effect for most of us, including most babies. And also, so getting in the bath or having a shower can be really helpful in stressful times. And also having a full tummy after a satisfying meal will also support the release of oxytocin and minimise the sense of stress. So I think that's about enough from me for now. And this is all stuff that your ancestors knew intuitively before and what science is consistently supporting now. Traditionally, they might have used ore or waiata or karakia or poi or kapahaka to access those states, but it worked in the same way. And the cool thing is that it's all about aroha, about love, and we could all do with a bit more of that at this stressful time. So for most, breastfeeding can be a bit of a challenge that requires some preparation and grit and some great support, but doing things that support the relaxation response and the release of oxytocin make a big difference both to your birth and breastfeeding journeys. And I saw evidence of this daily in my 15-year career as a community midwife. If you're needing breastfeeding information or support, remember that the Canterbury Breastfeeding Advocacy Service at Te Puawaitanga is all about helping you access that support. So check out our website at www.canbreastfeed.co.nz or our Facebook page at Canterbury Breastfeeding. Feel free to phone or email us. And if you happen to be watching this video on the Canterbury Breastfeeding Facebook page or the Whānau Mai Facebook page, throw any questions in the comments and we can answer them or just find a way to get in touch. And remember, ki te kore he aroha, he parau te oti ngātu. Without love, all is in vain. So wishing you all lots of love, heaps of oxytocin, and positive birthing and breastfeeding experiences, however they may look from the outside. Ka kite.